Alright, so Venus Next is coming out, and I wanted to do a few videos on some Venus cards that I feel are a little unknown. I feel like Venus is an expansion that people don't play a lot. I mean, obviously on Steam it didn't exist until, well, it will only exist in a few weeks or months, and in person it's probably the least popular expansion. So it's a deck filled with a bunch of cards that people are very in the dark about. And in particular, this one, local shading, I think it's slightly underrated. So yeah, let's go into it and look at math. Okay, so let's see what we have here. So I'm going to compare local shading to I picked acquired company and sponsors because they're very straightforward cards that basically just give you money production, and because that's what local shading ultimately does. I think this is the best way to compare them. So let's see what we have here on the table. I'm gonna do basically the total mega credits, including your investment into the card and what you gain each generation from your income. Same thing for sponsors and local shading. And finally, I'm going to compare the cash totals at different points in the game to see how they do best. So the best way to understand this is to just, let's start putting it in. So obviously first generation, your income is going to be 0 for acquire company, and then you're going to play it, and it's a cost of 13. Because it's 10 plus 3, and then from then on your income is going to be 3. And so, well, what happens is, from those original investment of 13, every turn you gain 3 until the last generation. And so at the end of the game, you're 14 up, assuming 10 generations. Now, obviously, the game can go anywhere from probably 7 to 11, maybe even 12 generations. I kept this one at 10 because basically every pattern that you see by a 10th generation with these 3 cards is going to hold. But we could put 17 and 20 here, but every pattern that you see by the 10th is going to hold by the 12th. We do need to pay attention to different things that happen in the 7th because it is a little different then. But for acquired company, you can see if you play this on the first generation, it's a pretty solid card. Gets you 14 MC for the end of the game. It's kind of a no-brainer if you have it in your opening hand. It's not a game-breaking card, but if you have that in your opening hand, you're going to play that on the first generation. It's probably one of the best cards, one of the cards played most in the first generation, not the best, obviously. And so yeah, let's look at sponsors, which is very similar. So it costs 3 less, that's a total cost of 9. Your income, it's not there in the first generation, but then you get 2. And yeah, same thing. Let's see how it grows. And you end up the game by the 10th generation on 9. So let's see how this last row here works. Let's just... so I have acquired company in the dark blue and sponsors in the light blue. And this is basically how much cash they are up or down each generation. So in the first generation, you're down 13 for acquired company and 9 for sponsors. So sponsors is ahead by 4. Obviously, because acquired company gives you 1 extra production, 1 extra MC per generation, that goes down each time until by the end of the game, acquired company is up by 5. Acquired company is at 14. This one is at 9, so it's up by 5. And you see that even if the game ends in 7th generation, acquired company is the better card here. And I do think it's the better card for sure. Like if you see this in the draft, both cards in the draft in the 2nd generation, you should always pick acquired company because it is unlikely that sponsor is going to get you more money. But yeah, these two are very basic. So let's get into the third one. Let's look at local shading. So local shading, the big advantage is that it costs 7, right? Minus 7. Now, a few things to compare here, other than the fact that local shading basically is, I think it gets a bad rap because people see it as a very insignificant raise to your money production every other generation. And that sounds like very insignificant. But I think it does a little more, and I'm going to get into a few combos that actually make it a little better. But the main thing to pay attention here is the very low price of 4. And that makes the overwhelming effect a little better. Other than that, these cards are very similar. They have no restrictions. I think the Earth tag is obviously a little better than the Venus tag, but if you're leaning into a Venus strategy, this one might be more useful. But yeah, so what happens? You play the first generation, you have no income, then you put the floater. Second generation, you take the floater away, and by the third generation, you'll have one income. And then the pattern will repeat. And let's go here until the 10th. And so what do you have? You have that you end the game with 13 cash, right? Now you get the bulk of that in the last 4 generations. So if the game is being rushed, this is probably not as good. But as you can see, if you play this in the first generation or a 10th generation game, it's basically the same as Acquired Company, which again is I think a card that for most people is a no-brainer just by itself. So if you had local shading in your opening hand, I would nearly always play this. But yeah, let's see the comparisons, and let's compare it to both. So same thing here, first with sponsors. So you can see local shading starts ahead because it costs 2 less, and then sponsors basically leads it for most of the game, but almost by nothing. Like you see, it's basically 2 mega credits ahead, and then last 2 generations, local shading is actually better, so it ends up with 4 mega credits more if you go 10 generations, 2 mega credits more if you go to 9 generations. At 8 they are the same, even though my coloring is giving the draw to sponsors. So you could argue this card is nearly the same as sponsors for games that go, you know, it's only 2 better, like it's between 2 and -2 for 9 generations. So it's almost the same as sponsors, unless the game is long, unless in that case local shading is better. Sponsors is marginally better for a 7th generation game. I don't think a 6th generation game even matters. It does matter that you can get 2 cash a little earlier, you know. Maybe you need exactly 2 cash to play a card in the 4th generation that pushes into the 5th because you're playing local shading, so that is important. The earlier cash is more important. But at the end of the day, it feels like the same as sponsors. Now, if you compare it to Acquired Company, the main advantage for local shading here is that it's really cheaper at the beginning. So, for example, this would actually allow you to play sponsors in the first generation with it, assuming you've already bought it, because you have 6 more. Whereas if you have that in Acquired Company, you'd have to wait till the 2nd generation to get sponsors, right? So the main advantage of local shading against Acquired Company is that early it has a lot of cash. However, as you can see here, Acquired Company dominates pretty much the whole middle of the game, and by the end of the game, it's gonna start to be a draw. You know, if it did Generation 14, then local shading takes the lead. So I would still think Acquired Company is better than local shading, but not by much. But especially if you're rushing, it does finish 3 cash ahead, even if you're down cash early. But this is really, I would never use local shading as a rushing, or if someone else has a very good rush. But otherwise, if it's you know, not as a rush that is as aggressive, or neither player starts the game by rushing, then local shading to me is a no-brainer, even if you don't have it combo with anything. However, this is a Venus card, and Venus came with 2 corporations that combo great with it, and those are Celestic and Viron. Now I have a few videos more coming on Viron, but I just want to say that this is actually enough for me to take Viron. To see this in my opening hand is enough for me to say, okay, I have something to do with Viron. And it's actually really strong. Same thing for Celestic, even though I like to get more floater cards with Celestic, because, you know, Celestic is more, like, Viron just needs to find other things that put floaters, that tap, while Celestic needs floaters that usually tap. So that, like, Celestic has a less cards that are useful in the late game, because the ideal thing that I want to get, for example, with both of these corps, with Viron and Celestic, is get advantage of income cards like local shading early, usually card draw in the middle game, and then victory point cards like floating hubs at the end of the game. But with Viron you can do an animal, and that's why Viron is stronger than Celestic, because it just works with more things, whereas Celestic is usually just adding a floater to a card that's going to give you a 1/2 at max. But yeah, so what's the effect with Viron and Celestic? It's the same for both. With local shading, it's going to be instead of every other generation, you get it every generation. Now, you're not going to do this the whole game. I would probably just do this 1 or 2 generations, max 3. But that's usually enough to make it a much better card. So first generation, let's resimulate this. And first generation, you start with 0 income, but Viron and Celestic both have the same effect. They just let you do it twice per turn. And so by the second generation, you've tapped and removed, you have 1 income. Second generation, same thing. And then from then on, let's say you find something better to put your floaters on. So it's just the old pattern of 1 each. And now look at how that works out. So if just doing it the first 2 generations, it means local shading is better than acquired company and sponsors full the whole game. And like I said, acquired company and sponsors, especially acquired company, is usually a no-brainer if you have it in your opening hand. It's not the best card, but I mean, there's really very little downside to playing it unless you're going for a very aggressive rush. So if you have Viron or Celestic in your opening hand and you see local shading, that's enough for me to play it. And see, it finishes 13 cash ahead of sponsors, 8 ahead of acquired company. It gives you 22 cash by the end of the game, which is very good. And it also dominates, it's better than them throughout the whole game. So every generation you'll have more cash with local shading than these 2 cards. Now let's see a scenario where instead of doing it twice, first and second generation, you just do it in the first. So that means, again, it's just gonna delay 1 round per income, basically. Because you do it, first generation you tap and remove, and then from then on you do the every other generation. As you can see here, it's better than sponsors the whole game. I mean, it's tied in 3 rounds, but it's better than sponsors the whole game. And it's better than acquired company the whole game too. It's just tied in 3 rounds. So even if you have something better, like there isn't a lot that's better earlier than income. But let's say you have Electro Catapult. Electro Catapult is obviously better than local shading. And you want to start using that in the second generation, it's worth to just play it, double tap it in the first, and then just tap it, get your income every other generation for it. And it'll be better than both sponsors and acquired company, which are solid first turn cards. And even if it's better, every generation. I want to emphasize that a lot because that's important. It's not that you finish with the most cash because you don't know when the game's gonna end, but every turn you have more cash if you're doing it with local shading. Yeah, finally, a scenario I wouldn't recommend is to go to the third generation doing it, and that just puts you really ahead. And you can see that you just finish the game 17 and 12 ahead, 26 total cash. It's a lot. I don't think you should just use Viron's and Celestic's ability. I think you should try to find something better by then. Usually card draw. So there's that floater card that does card draw, but there's all the basic card draw in the game is better because you'll draw two cards per turn. And after you set up your income the first 2 generations, I like to just get cards. But yeah, so in conclusion, local shading is actually a pretty solid card by itself. I mean, it's not the best card in the game, but like acquired company and sponsors, to me it's kind of a no-brainer early. Let's go to that scenario again. right? So it finishes 10 generations, 9 generations is better than sponsors. It's almost the same as Acquire Company, a little worse. So it's a solid income generator, despite how underwhelming it looks. And if you have something that combos with it, like Viron or Celestic, now these are my favorite two. It's really good. The other combo is floating hubs, and you can play floating hubs early. And I really like putting the floating hubs places on other cards, just using that the first generations, and then I probably should switch to floating hubs. Local shading can't place on other cards, unfortunately, but you'll keep moving your income throughout the rest of the game, and then you just move all your floaters to floating hubs from every other source, right? Finally, there are cards that place floaters on cards. I don't usually place those on local shading because I like to play. Usually, those cards are better played late for money, for points. So yeah, I think the main three scenarios for local shading combos, at least in the Venus deck, are Viron, Celestic, and Floating Hubs, but they're all pretty good. They all do exactly the same. And yeah, that's it for my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think, and see you next time.